Hello, how's everybody doing? I just got a message from one of you saying, "Are you on yet?" Yes, we're on now. I'm going to share this in all the places as we get set up today. But if this is your first time joining us, we've actually had a number of new members coming in recently. So welcome to the Leadership Forum live stream. Hi, Jesse. It's a good first step to um, what we do during this time. Hi, Jesse.
Hi.
Just giving a little intro about what this is, just in case we have some new people watching, because we've had some
Go for it.
new folks joining us. Um, Typically, what we've been doing here, this is, I guess, maybe our second or third month doing this, but we have been discussing a topic related to leadership or thought leadership or entrepreneurship and the intersection of all of these things. We select a topic for the month, and then 3 out of the 4 Wednesdays in a month, Jesse and I hop on live here to dig in very specifically. This is not a conversation that's just one way, though. So if you guys have comments or anything you want to add, I see Jason's watching. Hi, Jason. I think there's a few others as well. So say hello if you are. And then what we do also is on the other Wednesday, we open it up to you guys. So that's an opportunity. Oh, yay. Okay, good. I can see comments today. Sometimes you can't. We open up to you guys, and that's when we have our leadership roundtable. And so that's an opportunity for us all to gather in Zoom rather than here on Facebook Live, so that we can all talk together as peers and really bring to the table what's coming up for us around leadership, entrepreneurship, and the intersection of those things. Hey, Abby. Oh, yay. That's
Hey,
fun.
Abby. I'm so glad you're able to join us. And if you are interested in attending one of the monthly Zoom sessions where you actually get to use your voice instead of your fingers to talk to us, then I put the link in the comments. It's at northstarmessaging.com/roundtable. We'll send an alert with the topic on the Monday, and then we hop in on Wednesday. And actually, I need to correct you, Marie. This is not our second or third month doing this. It is officially May, which means it is our 4th month
Really?
doing this.
Wow, it has flown by.
Uh-huh.
That's crazy. I feel like we
I
just started
know,
this, but it's a lot of
right?
fun. And I'm glad that you guys are all here to join us. So, um, what we were talking about last week was our definition of thought leadership. So, we made a shift last year in our business. Hey, Rochelle. Hey, James. Um, in about January, maybe February, we started publicly talking about something that we had been talking about internally and just with a few of our very closest clients, which was not only messaging and copywriting and all that good stuff that we have built a name for ourselves out of and built a business out of, but how you can leverage that to actually stand up as a leader, how you can leverage that to create movement within other people and really allow us to tap into that sort of that bigger vision that many of us have. Now, not every entrepreneur is a thought leader, not every thought leader is an entrepreneur, but there is overlap a lot of the time. And a lot of the time, our businesses can be kind of a launch pad for us to be able to A, figure out what our thought leadership platform is, and B, leverage that audience that we're growing just as part of growing a business as an entrepreneur to create that movement. So last week we were actually defining thought leadership for us. Now it's become a bit of a buzzword and there's definitely some like poo-pooing on it because of that. And so our goal is to kind of get to the heart of what it actually means. What are the pieces that are useful? What is going to outlast the fad? And how we can leverage those in our lives and businesses. So that definition was an individual who has an innovative idea. So maybe they see some opportunity, right, within their field for improvement or change. They're an expert at what they do, and they recognize that they have influence, whatever that means. It doesn't have to be Oprah level, and that they're willing to and determined to combine all of that together to create positive forward momentum within other people. So essentially create something bigger than yourself. And that really does come down to messaging to be able to clarify what that is. So that's sort of why we're a part of it. So what we're going to be doing for the rest of the month is digging into the pieces of that definition and breaking them down and figuring out how they fit each of us and where are the opportunities.
Yes, absolutely. And Jason, yeah, it is interesting how many people thought that the idea of thought leadership was being diluted. And I think that is one of the reasons why it is so important for us to have a clear definition, because everything has a different meaning to different people, especially when it is a phrase that within the, at least the entrepreneurship realm or the marketing realm, is used a lot. The interesting thing is, outside of the marketing realm, most people have no idea what it means. It's not a word they would use in their day-to-day conversation. It's not something they would ever refer to themselves as, even if they have the qualities. So there are sort of two different sides to this idea of thought leadership. There's the place where it's almost over inundating us, and then there's the place where it's never used. And so in creating this definition, we want to bridge the gap between both of these realities and allow people to know what it is to us, how we define it, and how you can use that definition to grow your own thought leadership platform. Hey, Lindsay, thank you for joining.
Hey, Lori.
Rochelle says, your definition is a great anchor. I love that thought of it as an anchor, yeah, to remind me what I'm doing, yeah. And we're going to dive into each of those components over the next couple of weeks, starting with expertise. And we wanted to start with expertise because we've done some work with you guys around expertise in the past. Some of you who have been around may remember about almost a year ago, we did an Embrace Your Expertise challenge. And the whole thing we talked about there, which is still relevant today and is definitely relevant to thought leadership, is this idea that there are different types of expertise, and we have a natural tendency to undersell ourselves. And imposter syndrome is a very real issue that comes up for all of us, regardless of where we are, how big our business is, what successes we have or haven't seen. So today we're going to be talking about a couple of different things. We're going to dive into the different types of expertise that exist and how to identify your own strengths. And we'll tell you how we identified ours and how we've kind of gone through that process ourselves. We're going to talk about imposter syndrome and how you can overcome it and fully embrace your expertise. And we're going to talk about how you can continue growing your expertise, because it's a constant process, in ways that feel good and does not take away from everything else you're doing, because we know you have to-do lists that are a mile long.
Exactly. Hey, Lisa. Hey, Jennifer. So glad all you guys are joining us today. I like Lindsay's comment about how, Jesse, you look like my conscience. I think maybe you're the devil on the shoulder, actually.
Yeah, I'm probably not the angel on the shoulder. Let's be real.
Yes. So yes. And I think you're right. And your reflection here, your to-do list is haunting you, Lindsay, is probably something that a lot of people are sharing. And this is really interesting. Okay. Lori says, resistance about expertise. That is like what this is all about today, right? Comes about. So this is for Lori, because it makes me think focused on one thing. I'm not a Mozart, I'm a Benjamin Franklin. Ooh, I like that.
I love that.
Yes. So let's dig in then to different types of expertise. And I think you're right. This is one dichotomy here that we do see, which is the sort of subject matter expert where you go really deep. But then there's also the people who have a breadth of knowledge, right? They're maybe more of a jack of all trades, but that breadth of knowledge is extremely valuable as well. So I think there's sort of two ways to define that. And I think you're right, Lori, that a lot of times it gets pigeonholed. Expertise gets pigeonholed in terms of subject matter expertise and really being able to go in depth. But what can happen sometimes is that people who are in this camp, that's wonderful, right? And that's amazing. And that's how, so many amazing discoveries and ideas have come about. But it also can mean that they can be a little bit like with blinders on in terms of not being able to see other opportunities in other fields or opportunities for collaboration or pick up ideas from somewhere else that may be relevant to what you're doing. So for instance, I'm going to pick on one of our lovely clients, Danielle, recently was teaching us all about her business, which was about we actually did a teaching session. So she was practicing presenting, but also we were learning from her around how to really think about bringing in, when you're building a business, bringing in that social enterprise perspective and that give back perspective, and really baking that into the business plan from the beginning. And one of the things that she was talking about was actually borrowing an idea from permaculture and actually literally pulling in ideas about farming and applying it to business. And there's no way that she would be able to do that if she would just in business all the time. That's all she was thinking about. But because she's open to other ideas and she does have a wider breadth of knowledge, and she's actually worked with farmers as some of her clients, she's able to make these connections and create a really cool analogy and a new way for people to think about building a social enterprise.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great example. And I think there's this interesting dichotomy between people who have a depth and a breadth of knowledge, and relating it back to the copywriting world, because that's the world that Marie and I operate in a lot. There are copywriters who the only thing they do ever is write sales pages. That is it. That is all they do. They are sales page experts. They've studied all the greats. That is what they sell. And they only do it with one specific type of client. There are other copywriters who, they may not be just sales page writers. They might write a variety of content. They might write blog posts. They might write sales pages, website copy, etc. They're not necessarily putting their expertise on the type of copy. What they're doing is they're putting their expertise on maybe the industry. So they might write a wide variety of content, and they might do it for the education industry. So there are different ways to frame your expertise as well. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that you are doing one thing all the time with one person. It just means that you have this sort of realm of comfort where you know what you're talking about. You have the experience. This goes into the different types of expertise, which I'll cover very briefly, but you have the experience to say that, yes, I can get that job done for you. I can do it, and I can do a good job at it. Even if imposter syndrome comes up and is like, yeah, but can you? Yes, you can.
Yeah.
So the three different types of expertise we're talking about today, just to sort of broadly talk about them, and we can go into more detail, is personal experience. So this is not necessarily directly working with clients. My writing skills have been built since I got my first journal when I was 6 years old. And I've kept a journal since I was 6 years old, and that has helped me to cultivate my skills as a writer. But it's personal experience. It's not necessarily I'm writing in this journal to become a great copywriter. That was not my goal, and still is not my goal with my journal. There's professional experience, which is the work that we do with our clients every single day. And then there are the sort of receipts of knowledge, which I think are in some ways maybe the least important of the three, which are the degrees and the certifications and things like that. So those are sort of the three different branches of expertise that we're talking about when we say that word.
Right. So this is a really good point here, James. Expertise comes from two areas, experience and research, right? So I think those both happen in terms of these three areas of personal experience, professional experience, and those degrees, certifications, the stuff you hang on the wall, right? All of it can be super beneficial. All of it can involve both of those directions, right, in terms of research and experience. But I'd love to hear from you guys, if you have sort of a hierarchy internally. I know that there's certain fields where degrees, certifications are super important, right? Or there's certain maybe assumptions that are made about a field. Like, for instance, you hear this about coaching a lot, right? That there's there's certain ways to approach coaching which are more effective than other ways. And it may not be what we assume they're going to be when we go into them. So being able to get some training around that, not only helps us say, hey, here's some proof on my website, but also it helps us approach, with our approach in terms of working with clients. And I think, too, the personal experience and the professional experience are immensely important. So, love to hear from you guys. The way that we sort of envision this is imagine a circle, right? And that it is almost made of like concentric circles that are expanding outward. So, whenever you're investing some time and energy into either these personal experiences, so maybe you're taking like a personal trip or something, right? Like recently, Jesse and I went to France. Part of that was just vacation and celebrating 2017 and just having a great year and celebrating our friendship together. But part of it too was to allow ourselves some more personal experiences, right? To be able to draw upon them. Some of that was professional as well, because we were able to see where some of the gaps in our business were when we said goodbye to it for a couple of weeks. But of course, we draw upon our professional experience, and the more we have of that, we're able to really dig in to and lean upon that professional experience. To me, part of this is sort of the Hermione Granger effect, where she loves to learn and read from books, and very much is like sort of in a theoretical space. But once she's able to gain more experience in, fighting the Dark Lord. Yes, I've got into Harry Potter land, guys. Sorry.
It's acceptable.
That actually that like the book smarts are still there, and her ability to draw upon that knowledge is still useful, and is one of the reasons that she's sort of an effective member of the team, as it were. But her professional experience actually sort of, or not professional, in this case, professional, personal experience actually grows in weight, right? And in sort of importance as she gains more of it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think for a lot of people it starts out as sort of a like step-by-step thing. You go to school to get this sort of background of knowledge and maybe a degree or certificate. But yeah, like you said, Jason, there are a lot of people who have certificates on the wall but are not necessarily applying them in a way that has real-world relevance. I was having this conversation actually just yesterday with my partner, who is, she's a paleontologist by trade, which means she's very engaged in the world of academia. And the fact that the world of academia is sort of its own world, where there's this constant research and one-upmanship, and they're in their own bubble. But when it comes to applying the things that they're doing to the rest of the world, sometimes there's a struggle there. Sometimes it's hard to take it outside of the academic bubble and into the real world, which is why I think the personal experience and the professional experience that isn't directly tied to a degree or a certificate is just as important. You need to have the opportunity to take things out of theory land and into practical land.
Yes. And I think you're right, Rochelle, right? Like, for a field like Tara's, for instance, right? Or the ones, the examples that Rochelle's getting here, archaeology, studying cultures around the world. Absolutely. Like that formal training, that formal education is super important. And I really like Lori's comment here too about how it's really important to ground yourself, but it also helps you define the box so that you can think outside of it. So you understand sort of what are the parameters and what are those opportunities that are missing if you're wanting to tap into your thought leadership. So I really like both of those comments there.
Yeah. And James, I think I would tend to agree that having degrees and certificates in some cases is much less helpful for you. I definitely found that true as a teacher when I walked into a classroom with pretty much zero training to be a teacher. Didn't do anything, didn't major in education, just majored in English and decided to become a teacher because that's what I was told that English majors do. I feel, but being on the back end of that, having taught for 5 years, I feel like if I had actually gotten a degree in education, I would have kind of limited myself in some ways. I would have been so stuck on the theories because I know the way my brain works. I would have been so stuck on the theories and practicing things the way I was supposed to that it wouldn't have given me the creative and innovative freedom to actually create a classroom that really responded to me, which when it's a bunch of 16-year-olds is important.
I do feel, so going to your other comment here, James, like he says, no one gives a damn that I was a top English major. They care that I've helped so many authors to write books that they love, even though the first led to the second. And I think that last sentence is key, right? Because it may not matter to them what your degree was in or even that you have one at all. But if it was foundational for you and it provides some grounding for you and some confidence, or like maybe maybe you end up working with an academic at some point who wants to be writing a book and it matters to them. But I think ultimately, if it's important to you, and you feel that it's been formative for you to be able to get to where you are in terms of your expertise, it's still valid. And it doesn't mean you have to put it on your website or hang the diploma, behind you in the videos or whatever.
Right, exactly. And to go to Rochelle's comment really quick, and I'm going to like sort of skim read these because the downloads when we upload them don't have the comments on them. But what Rochelle said is what comes to mind is Danielle Laporte's latest drama. Yeah, I feel if someone on her team had enough expertise on cultural references, that could have been avoided. Yeah, and I think this goes back to something you said a little bit further back, Rochelle. I lost it in all the comments, but essentially that one of the things your clients struggle with is that they're so specialized that they hold themselves back. And so I think there's also an amount of recognition that is necessary that we cannot be experts in everything. We can be generalists, we can be experts in sort of a breadth of things, but we still cannot be experts in everything. So it's our responsibility to figure out where we might be lacking and to make sure that those gaps are filled. And I think in the situation that you're talking about, that's one of those situations where maybe she didn't have the expertise to understand what she was putting out to the world, but if someone on her team had, it could have been prevented.
Right. Yes. So I think that's a very wise point, is to look at the fact that expertise can actually be kind of a hindrance, in that, like, obviously we cannot know everything to a certain depth. So whether or not you are going for depth or you're going for breadth, there's going to be some areas that you just cannot cover. So being really honest with yourself and looking at what those areas are so that you can complement them with members of your team or a peer mastermind group or a mastermind group that you're able to talk with, or a mentor, or even just a Facebook group like this, right? Where you can come in and be like, hey, help. Because that's really important, to be able to admit that, to make sure that you're not finding yourself in a similar situation like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And James, yeah, being an expert in your thing does not make you an expert in tangentially related things. Exactly. Yeah, it may give you a head start in some tangentially related things, but the expertise is not fully transferable to endless areas. And our own expertise is a constant growing process. So, Marie and I are copywriters by trade, but copywriting 10 years ago looks way different from copywriting today. So there's also this relevance piece of making sure that however you're growing your expertise, whether it's personal, professional, or sort of degree certificate, whichever route you're taking, you have to stay on top of it
Mm-hmm.
because things change. At least pieces of it changed. Maybe the whole concept, I mean, good writing is still good writing, right?
Yeah,
It's not going to change as far as that's concerned. But markets change, tactics change, what people respond to change, especially as fields become more inundated with a lot of people saying the same things in our case.
totally. Hey, Sarah, I'm glad you're watching. Just to sort of circle back to that, Lori, your question, what was the drama? It was just about, there was a campaign that was culturally insensitive, I'm sure unintentionally. And then the way it was handled just was sort of, it was sort of brushed under the rug, essentially. So I think essentially it's just being willing to sort of look at where our holes are, and to be able to acknowledge those and hopefully fill them in before before things get to a place where there's, a scandal or frustration, right? Or even just like we feel like we're not doing the best job we can for our clients or our community.
Yeah, and this sort of dives into a different topic that we'll talk about in a future week, but that influence piece, at least in the situation that we're referencing right now, she has a lot of influence.
Yeah,
We also have influence within our own realm. So how we approach situations when we know we have influence is also important. And sometimes that can fall back on our expertise, or sometimes it's us calling on the expertise of other people and acknowledging that that is a hole that we are filling in.
totally. So let's move on to topic number 2 for the day, digging back into this topic of expertise around imposter syndrome. So how, Jesse, can we overcome imposter syndrome so that we can really fully embrace the breadth or depth of our expertise?
I love that you're asking me. That's a nice deflection right there. Of like, I don't want to answer this.
Hey, you read the email.
So I think that this goes back to a conversation we've had a few times about fear and the idea that to a degree, imposter syndrome is never going to disappear completely because we are multifaceted human beings who hopefully are always testing ourselves and stretching ourselves outside of our comfort zone. And if we do that, if we are constantly pushing ourselves to grow as thought leaders, as entrepreneurs, as individuals, then yes, there is going to be a little fear and there's going to be a little imposter syndrome. What I think is more important than overcoming imposter syndrome or getting rid of it is learning how to recognize it and how to recognize when it is telling you things that aren't true. Mm. So, for example, literally every time we get a new copywriting project, I'm convinced that the client is going to hate it and it's going to be a total failure. That has never happened. I have no proof of that being a reality. But the little voice in my head starts going and being like, oh, you're not actually a good writer. You don't actually know what you're doing. What are you talking about? Why are you doing this? They're going to hate it. They're going to take it out against you, and it's going to say something about you as a person. But I've learned over time that that is a story that has no basis in reality. And it's going to probably come up forever in some way. But the voice gets smaller the more that I continue to develop my expertise. So what I've learned to do is just sort of acknowledge it, say hello, hi, nice to see you again. Glad you decided to show up for this party. You can go hang out in the back room while I actually get some work done. But not getting rid of it, just engaging with it and acknowledging it and just allowing it to be a part of the process for me and maybe to direct some of the ways I continue to grow my expertise. So if I'm feeling that the voice is particularly strong with one type of copy, maybe it's because I haven't practiced that one as much recently. So that tells me that as I'm continuing to work on growing my expertise, I may want to look at that specific type of copy because that's where the voice is the loudest right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Rochelle and Lori are saying essentially the same thing here. It can ride in the car, it just can't get in the driver's seat. The fear voice has a role, but it's not allowed to be in charge. You guys and your brain link, look at that. Yeah, for sure. Sorry, James is right. The bus. Let me throw you under it. You can throw me into the bus for the next question. That's fine. Yes, and I think the other piece of this that's coming up for me is really learning to detach from the outcomes and to look at what am I responsible for. So when we look at the fact that, hey, I feel like I showed up fully for this project or whatever it is, and that I did the best that I could, knowing what I have with the information that I have, and knowing that, the outcome is going to be what the outcome is going to be. We can't control other people's reactions or responses to us or our work. All we can do is really do the best that we can do. And when we rely upon the expertise that we've amassed so far in order to do the best job that we can do, there's really nothing more that can be done, right? Obviously, we could say, hey, it'd be great if I had taken that course by now, or if I'd worked with a project exactly like this before. But that isn't reality, and we cannot control other people's responses. So all we can do is look at our own personal responsibility. This is something that I wrestle with. I don't know if Linda's watching this, but if so, she'll know that that's something that we were just talking about recently in the book club around the art of possibility, where I was having some blocks around this idea of taking on the responsibility for situations or for my actions in some ways where, and Lisa will know this too, right? That it's been a big learning process for me that okay, here's what I am responsible for. Here's what I am not responsible for. And really figuring out what the distinction is between that, because even though I think of myself as a pretty aware person who is like a really good listener, or like, I don't know, I try to be thoughtful about how I approach life, but like it's not the distinction that I thought it was. The line is actually drawn in a different place than I thought it was.
Yeah, totally. And I think too, there's a risk in following that and allowing that imposter syndrome and fear voice to take too much control, and in letting those outcomes that you were
Yeah.
talking about, Marie, and letting the way other people respond dictate how we feel. I was just having this conversation last night about how there's so many of us are perfectionists. Like that is our thing. We are perfectionists and we wear that badge with pride. But are we being perfectionists at the sake of progress? Are we allowing ourselves to worry so much about getting it perfect and getting it right because we have that imposter syndrome coming up that we're not actually getting things done? Or if we are, it's taking 10 times as long as it should. And anyone who knows me knows that I am a big proponent of doing the most amount of work in the least amount of time. I like to find the shortcuts that are actually effective, the shortcuts that should exist because everyone's been taking the long way around and not thinking about what shortcuts could exist. And I think this is true of imposter syndrome as well. When we buy into that story, we trip ourselves up and we end up stuck in this endless loop of trying to make things perfect for the wrong reasons. And then we never are able to move ourselves forward.
Yes. I really like this observation here by James. So this is his personal revelation. One thing that comes up periodically for me here is that sometimes I'll screw up and then the client will be happy and I'll have to scramble to get back on their good side. Initially, this is a really big blow for me. Sorry, I just lost it. This was a really big blow for me when it happened, and I'd usually respond defensively. Hello, yes, I hear you on that. Not just with client stuff, with everything, right? What's helped make it easier has been realizing that screwing up and learning how to fix it, those two things are, number one, part of developing expertise, and number two, usually an indication that I'm out of alignment somewhere, not that I actually suck, right? So
You don't suck, James.
right? I really need to find the exact quote. And I know I've mentioned this one to you before, James, but it's within one of the, I guess, the most recent Brandon Sanderson book. We're all in the Brandon Sanderson fan club train here. But it's talking about how basically a life with no failure in it is really not a life worth having lived because you haven't tried like experimenting. You haven't like thought outside the box. You haven't like allowed yourself the ability to fail because you've been playing safe, right? So I think that's really interesting, and I think it does allow us to explore that personal growth, that personal expertise, and the professional. And I think what's important is what you added too, James, about like also being able to take responsibility for it and fix it, or at least have a conversation around it and close the loop on that. This is probably one of the first conversations I had with Lisa. Actually, we had a client that was no longer a great fit for us, even though they're like amazing people, great work. It just didn't work for what we were doing. And she was like, don't just like run away from this without closing the loop on it, right? Because there's an opportunity for a relationship there. There's an opportunity for us to grow. And just that relationship deserves it, you know, and that we deserve that opportunity to grow from something that we've invested a lot of time and energy in. And now we're doing a lot of hand wringing around this decision.
Yeah, yeah. And the result of that was that we were able to, resolve things with that client on good terms,
Yes.
and, continue to have a positive relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to circle back around to something James said too, about the shortcut thing that I mentioned, where they've been taking shortcuts for so long that they don't realize it's screwing them over. And I think that's a really good point. And I want to make a clear distinction between good shortcuts and bad shortcuts because they both exist. And I think a lot of times shortcuts are perceived as negative things. It means that you're cutting corners, you're not doing a good job, you're not dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's. And I think that can be true. People who take shortcuts often end up not necessarily doing themselves or their clients or their audience a service. That said, I think a lot of times we also create more work for ourselves than necessary because we don't see the excess that we're piling on just out of habit, out of that fear voice, out of the way things have always been done. This is something that actually got me in trouble a lot in my past jobs because people would, in both the education field and in the marketing field, in both of those jobs that I had before I went full time with this business, I took their existing systems and their existing way of doing things, and I made it something you could do in 1 hour instead of 3 days. And people were annoyed with me because all of a sudden I didn't have to go to their meetings and I didn't necessarily have to show up to all of their discussions about things that were actually just echo chambers. And instead, I was putting things in place that grew the revenue and created more success and happiness from the people who were engaging in the services. But there was resistance there because I was taking a shortcut, but it wasn't actually a shortcut. It was a more efficient way of doing things and getting the desired results. So I think it's important to make the distinction there between a shortcut because you're, I don't know, lazy, and a shortcut because it makes sense.
Well, and I think that's the distinction here, right? Like James' business is built around basically debunking this reliance on a shortcut because it actually doesn't help you in the long run. And I think that's the key, right? Because the shortcuts that you were looking at the museum were shortcuts that, yes, they made financial sense. Yes, they made sense in terms of time spent, but they also still accomplished the desired result in a more effective way. So if there were, a way to write a book that was still effective, true to them, all of that in like the super short, insanely fast timeline, maybe there wouldn't be an issue here. But James is seeing that going so quickly through the process actually can create damage in the long run, that like the shortcut in itself is inherently causing a problem. Then it makes sense, right, to sort of shake the boat or rock the boat a little bit.
Yeah. And I think this is another symptom of being an expert, right? The more of an expert you are, the more you're able to see how to streamline things. And it doesn't necessarily mean that those shortcuts mean that things take less time.
Right.
It means that it's a more efficient use of your time. So James, when you work with clients, you aren't necessarily telling them you're going to get a book done in a week. Like that's not your model and that's not what you believe. But the book that you help them create is going to be what it needs to be for them because you've streamlined your approach and you are an expert in getting it done and knowing how to do it for your clients.
Which actually means it is more efficient in the long run, right? Because then they don't have to go and be like, man, my first book just wasn't what I needed. I need to go back and do number 2 and do it right. They can just get it right from the beginning with your guidance. So it actually is an efficiency creator, just sort of unintuitively, right? Cool. Anything else around imposter syndrome? I feel like we kind of ran off of that topic.
Yeah. Well, I think the imposter syndrome informs a lot of decisions, but circling back around to just expertise as a broad topic, the imposter syndrome will always be there. But the voice will sort of ebb and flow based on how far into your comfort zone you are. And I also think sort of a last comment on imposter syndrome, if it does disappear entirely, if that fear voice just poof vanishes, that is a really good indication that you are so far into your comfort zone that you are not necessarily growing yourself. So not necessarily that that's a bad thing if that's what you want, but that's an invitation for you to look at what you're doing and ask yourself if it is what makes the most sense for you right now if your goal is to continue growing.
Right. Am I playing it safe? Hey, Angelica, welcome. So we're moving on now to the third piece of today's conversation. Okay, so if you've decided you want to continue growing your expertise, which I think probably all of us do here, right? Because this is a pretty motivated group of professionals here. So how to continue growing your expertise, but doing it in a way that feels good and isn't going to just make your to-do list feel insane. So I think step number one around this is actually to take real stock of your current level of expertise. So a lot of times we're our own harshest critic when it comes to this, especially if we feel like we are wrestling with imposter syndrome a lot and that it's more in the driver's seat than just sort of in the car as a voice. Take some time to actually sit down and look at what expertise you do have. Pull out some testimonials. Look at the client work you've done. Look at the results you've gotten for them. If you don't know, go back and talk with them. Go and pull in pieces of your life story that are actually applicable and that you draw upon in your work or in your thought leadership platform. Of course, yes, take stock of any degrees, certifications, past jobs, whatever else in terms of, plaques on the wall. That stuff is totally important too. But I think a lot of us forget and shortchange ourselves when we're looking at what we do have. And then I think it becomes clear to be able to see where you may be lacking something that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also there's this sort of light bulb moment anytime you take stock of the expertise you already have. And Marie and I have experienced this multiple times when when we're talking with an agency or an organization who is looking at hiring us and they want to see a portfolio of our work. One of the things we tend to do is create a specialized portfolio that's in line with what they do so that they're not digging through all of the work that we've done to find the ones that are relevant to what they do. And every time we create one of those specialized portfolios, at the end, I have this moment where I'm like, we do a lot of stuff and we do it really well. But it's so buried in Google Drive and on other websites and, it's stuff that hasn't necessarily made our portfolio page that we forget all of the stuff that we've done to get to this point and we almost disregard it. So I definitely agree with you there, Marie, that the first step is to just take stock. And I would add to create a system where you're regularly taking stock. Maybe it's once a quarter, maybe it's once a month, maybe it's just once a year, but where you go back and you sort of look at what have I accomplished since the last time I took stock? What sort of proof of that expertise do I have, whether it's testimonials or case studies or a new shiny thing to hang on the wall, whatever it might be, that I can sort of just use as affirmation that I am taking steps forward. And then I think the other piece of it is to sort of choose which category you're focusing on between personal, professional, and degrees. Where are you going to, and you can of course grow more than one at one time, but where do you want your focus to be? So if maybe I wanted to focus on professional expertise, maybe I'm looking at studying a specific type of copywriting or a specific famous copywriter who did really well, and I want to dive into his methodology or her methodology. If it's personal experience, maybe it's just getting out more and having more experiences that I can draw on as a writer, or journaling more, or something that is not directly tied to my work, but helps me improve as a writer and helps me improve as someone who can help other businesses with their messaging and with their own content.
Yes. And I think the other piece of that is to make sure you know why you want to focus in that area. So if it's a why because, you're, for instance, we were talking about Tara's field earlier, right? Like you're in the field of paleontology, and there's just a lot of pressure from the culture of the field to have these higher degrees, just to have them, right? Like maybe it does, maybe it doesn't make sense for you to focus on that. Maybe it actually does make more sense to look at like, where are things feeling like, where do you feel like you don't quite have the leg to stand on that you want to stand on in terms of maybe your personal experience in storytelling, right? Or maybe it's in terms of that professional experience in terms of like how this actually works in the field or in daily life. Or maybe it is from the theoretical side of things. For instance, my husband right now, he has a final today actually for grad school. He has been a software developer for his entire career, but doesn't have a computer science degree. So he's actually going now through the process of taking a course through a graduate student program for computer science. So it's really, for him, it's yeah, it's something nice to hang on the wall, but the other reason behind it is to provide some sort of theoretical backing for all the practical work that he already has. So in that case, it does make sense. So make sure you examine the why, not that it's the why of you should have this thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think we're in a unique boat as entrepreneurs where our expertise can grow in a lot of different directions all the time, especially if you're a solopreneur, especially if you don't have a team yet, because you kind of have two different types of expertise. You have your expertise in what you do for people, so copywriting or messaging strategy in our case. And then you have the expertise in running a business, which you may or may not come to this experience having. And
We
for a
didn't.
while, at least, no, we didn't. We had no idea what we were doing. And a lot of you may feel the same way. A lot of you may have no idea or have had no idea how to run a business when you decided to start one, but you had something you wanted to share with the world. And I think that's an area where there are a lot of opportunities to, one, continue to grow that breadth of expertise as long as you're doing it strategically, and two, on the sort of flip side of the coin, to get lost in the weeds on accident because you're spending so much time learning about the newest Facebook algorithms or how LinkedIn is where you need to be right now or how to run webinars that you are growing your expertise in an area that actually might not serve you.
Yes.
So two things I can kind of think of here. One is to know when to hire out and when to do it yourself. And when you're at a point that you can do that, and usually you're at a point that you can do that before you actually are at a point where you like are ready to pull the trigger. It's usually sooner than that that you actually need the help. Um, and then the other piece is the reason why we started the book club. For those of you in the book club, for those of you not in the book club who don't know, the book we're reading this month is Ask. One of the reasons we chose that book was entirely selfish because we wanted to work on our expertise in market research, which is something that we feel like we could grow, where we could grow in our expertise, and that it's in line with our overall goals as a business, and it's not something we want to outsource to someone else. It's something we actually intentionally want to grow on in our awareness and in our bubble.
Right. Absolutely. So, and I think when it comes to outsourcing, there's a couple ways to look at it. One is, can you build expertise on your team, even if it means you're not the one digging into, the course on Instagram hashtags or whatever, right? Number two, though, is can you outsource or at least get some guidance or mentorship on how you can make your life or business more efficient to grant yourself more time to dig into the stuff that you do want to dig into? So reaching out to, like, for instance, one of our clients, Teresa Beretta, who is amazing in terms of systems, productivity, workflows, operations, right? And able to help you set up that stuff that actually gives you back time in your day for the stuff that you want to do. So that may be, again, more client work or just being able to take on more work. But part of it, bye Lisa, thanks for coming. But part of it too may be just allowing you to take the time and energy you want to take to build that expertise, whether it's through, certification or degree, or whether it's through, just getting more professional experience or taking some time for yourself. Maybe you just need like one of those sort of restorative Bali vacations or, retreats or something to be able to like learn something about yourself, come up with some more stories, to be able to get some perspective on what it is that you know and can share with your audience.
Yeah, and so one of the things that Lindsay posted way, way, way earlier on this live stream was that he didn't have a system for tracking his expertise or his growth in his expertise, which makes it hard to find what holes you want to fill and hard to really give yourself that pat on the back and that acknowledgement that you are continuing to grow. So a couple of things there. One, for the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, I've had an if this then that set up that sends me a text every single day on my phone. And that text just says, what are you grateful for? But something like that, where you're getting an alert every day that's like, what did I learn today? How did I grow today? Or if you have a journaling practice, jotting down, what did I learn today? Or what do I want to learn today? Just to keep it top of mind, I think is really, really powerful as far as just creating a system. And I know too that some of us are motivated by shiny things. So stickers. I know Marie is a sticker
I
person.
like stickers. Okay, I'm still in kindergarten, guys.
Which is fine. I think also like that's a key piece of it, right? Bring some fun back into it. Expanding your expertise does not have to mean I'm going to sit down with a giant textbook and be miserable for a
Right.
week as I try to learn this complicated concept. Expanding your expertise can mean something really fun and light and exciting for you. And I've seen this on a lot of Instagram stories lately where people are having CEO days where they just are working on the things that they need to work on to grow their expertise or their business strategically rather than being so wrapped up in client work, which client work is a way to grow your professional expertise, but it's about that balancing act, right? So setting aside time, setting aside quarterly check-ins, just making it a part of your habit so that you know not just where you stand, but where you're going as well.
Totally. I do want to circle back to Rochelle's comment here. Talking to someone when you're making that decision, and that decision that she's
Mm.
referring to is where do I want to focus my expertise building energy right now? Talking to someone outside of your head is helpful, right? And I want to also mention that I think this relates to Jason's comment here. It's so true when you take the entrepreneurial world into a brick and mortar business, or I think the other way around, right? They have no idea about what's actually available to them in the current world. So that's a great opportunity right there to like those places where it's like you have this expertise, but A, you're stuck in your own head. B, you're stuck in your own reality of what isn't actually reality. You've constrained your possibilities. It's great to have, a business bestie or whatever, somebody to like bounce ideas off of, a mentor, a coach, a mastermind group, anything like that. Or even again, a community like this, super valuable to be able to get outside of your own head and your own limited perspective to be able to see what else is out there.
Yeah, and I think it's important too to just focus on growing your expertise in one way at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Which isn't to say you can't be a generalist, which isn't to say we can't circle back around to what you mentioned earlier, Lori, about being a Benjamin Franklin.
Right.
Like that's totally fine, but you can't actively grow multiple areas of expertise at once because the incremental growth will be so small, it's negligible, and then you can't give yourself a pat on the back because it doesn't feel like you've gone anywhere.
Right.
So when you do take that time for yourself to grow, choosing one thing during that container of time, and then the next time you have a container of time, you can either continue to expand upon the previous thing or switch to something else.
Exactly. So we have homework for you guys, which is a two-parter. So part one of this is number one, take some time in the next week here to take stock of the expertise that you currently have, bearing in mind that it may include personal, it will include, right? Personal, professional, and these sort of degrees and certifications. Take stock of where you already are, and then start working on a process of deciding which area you're most interested in moving forward, but make sure that you have a why behind it. And sort of as a sub to that, it may make sense for you to bring this question to a trusted friend or a mentor to help be a sounding board for you as you make that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of want to add one more thing on the degree and certification thing, because I feel like this is a part of the conversation we've missed, but might be able to circle around to again later. Degrees and certifications are kind of new ideas in the scheme of human history, right? Like having to be certified in order to practice something, which is why I think you can be a completely successful expert and not have a single degree or certification. I think another thing to kind of add to that list is apprenticeships. So studying under or with or having a mentor who can show you how to grow in that area of expertise. You may not get a certificate out of it. You may not even ever necessarily interact with that person directly, depending on how you're getting that knowledge and how you're studying it, but it still works to grow your expertise. So I think that's kind of another piece to that third part, where it's not just degrees or certifications, it's also apprenticeships, which might not have something shiny to hang on the wall, but is just as important.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And it's actually a conversation I had with Angelica probably, gosh, over a year ago. I think it was maybe last summer. I don't even know if you remember this, Angelica, but we were talking about if you're selecting a mentor, like a business coach, and you're looking to develop your own business, for the most part, it can make the most sense if you select a business coach who, yes, you jive with them, your personalities get along, you're looking forward to interacting with them. But also, like, imagine this, right? Like, you're envisioning a business that's like pretty much fully passive income, and you're going to be running ads, you have funnels, that's the way you want to run your business. But your business coach is sitting over here making all of their money from like one-on-one consulting all the time, and they've really never actually built any passive income for themselves. It may be a little hard for them to provide guidance for you around that. So being really selective, I guess, with that process, and to be able to select somebody who is really able to be a mentor in all the ways you're looking for, not just in terms of, being a helpful voice or a cheerleader for you.
Yes, absolutely. So all of that said, you guys do have homework this week, which, to quickly reiterate, is to take stock of your existing expertise, everything that you can think of. Maybe go back and look at some of the past work you've done, people you've worked with. If you're really stuck, just ask people, reach out, ask them what they think that you are an expert in. You might be surprised with some of the results,
Yes.
some of the responses you get. It's always interesting to ask other people what they think. They're usually much kinder to us than we are to ourselves.
And like more observant, right? Because things that we think are super easy, they're like, you're amazing at that. Do you realize how cool that is? And you're like, I don't know. That's my thing.
Yes. And then part 2 of the homework. What was part 2, Marie?
Part 2 was deciding.
You came up with the homework. I was not expecting homework.
So part 2 is with these 3 areas in terms of personal, professional, and degrees and certifications, which is the area that you would like to dedicate some time to developing more fully, and why, right? Because I think the why is really important. It can't just be because she said I should, right? That's not a great reason for like basically anything in life. Unless you're a child and your mom tells you, then do it.
Right.
But that's no one here.
Don't take candy from strangers.
Right. Just because. Yes. Jason, you're right. I think that's one of the great things available to us, experts available to help us through specific areas and topics. Exactly. So I think when you're clear on what it is we want, we can seek out those experts more strategically, right? Yes, exactly. And I think you're right, Angelica, on that. And like in selecting a mentor, pick somebody who can speak to what you're trying to do, not just somebody who's wise and you really like and respect.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
That stuff too.
So a lot to unpack here with expertise. I love this topic personally because we all have areas of expertise that we're constantly working on. That sort of bubble of expertise is constantly growing, and how quickly it grows or the way in which it grows is entirely up to us taking responsibility for the ways in which we want to grow. So think about it. Think about how you want to grow over the next week or so. And as a sort of third optional part to your homework, put something on the calendar to check in with yourself regularly and check in with, am I growing as an expert in a way that makes sense for me and that allows me to really solidify that thought leadership platform?
Exactly. So thank you all so much for being here. This has been all the more fun with each of you here, providing comments and contributing to the conversation. So we will be here same time, same place next week. And we hope that you will join us at that time for another live stream. So thanks so much, everybody, and hope you have an awesome rest of your week. And happy May. Bye.
Yay.